Liberty Park was always the place Emily Harper turned to when the world became too heavy. The ancient trees rustled in the wind like gentle arms offering protection, and the bird song echoing nearby eased the loneliness in her heart. On the old wooden bench beneath the shade of a tree, Emily sat with her face tilted toward the faint sunlight, feeling each breeze as it brushed through her hair. But the most important thing to her was Shadow, the loyal guide dog lying close by her feet. 3 years ago, a devastating fire had taken her sight and her entire family, leaving Emily in a world of darkness and emptiness. But then there was Shadow. He wasn't just a guide. He was a friend, an emotional anchor, her eyes, and her heart. "You know what, Shadow?" Emily whispered, gently stroking the dog's smooth fur. "I used to think I would never find the light again, but you are my light." Shadow lifted his head slightly, his warm brown eyes looking at her, as if he understood every word she had just said. But today, something was wrong. Emily sensed an unusual tension in Shadow's body. The leash in her hand quivered lightly as the dog growled, a low, warning growl. "What's going on?" Emily wondered. She tilted her head, listening carefully, but all she could hear were the children's laughter and the rustling leaves. Suddenly, Shadow sprang to his feet, his muscles taut like a drawn bowstring. Emily felt her heart race. She didn't need to see to know one thing for certain. Danger was approaching. Emily could clearly feel the change in the air around her. The cool, gentle breeze she once loved suddenly turned cold, as if carrying an invisible warning. Shadow stood in front of her, body tense, fur bristling at the nape of his neck, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat, steady like a drumbeat signaling danger. "What is it, Shadow?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling not from the cold, but from the vague fear that was slowly becoming real. She tightened her grip on the leash, the rough texture of the leather under her fingers anchoring her to the last shred of calm she had left. Then she heard footsteps, not the light sounds of joggers or walkers she usually heard in the park. These were heavy, arrogant steps, stomping against the ground as if to assert their menacing presence. Following there was a low, mocking chuckle. "Don't panic, Emily," she told herself, but her heart had already started pounding harder, each beat echoing against her chest. "Well, look who we found here," a voice rang out cold and full of malice. The blind princess and her loyal dog. Emily froze. She didn't need to see to know what that voice held. Cruelty. And worse, the delight of finding someone weaker. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, sensing Shadow's shift to stand protectively in front of her, ready to defend. Another heavy footstep approached closer. "This dog looks fierce, huh, Mick?" The mocking voice rang out again. "Think it knows any tricks? Or does it just lead blind girls around?" They burst into laughter, the sound echoing through the park, making everything around feel more foreign and terrifying than ever. Emily felt her face burn with anger and fear. She knew she couldn't count on help from any passersby. Most people would choose to avoid danger rather than confront it. "Leave me alone," Emily said, her voice steadier than she expected. Though trembling inside, she wouldn't allow herself to appear weak in front of them. But her words only excited them more. "Oh, listen to her like she's got any say in this," another voice chimed in, drawing out each word mockingly. "What do you think, Rex? Want to see what the dog can do?" A silence fell. Emily could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the anticipation, the thrill as if they were about to do something worse. Then she heard the sound that sent chills down her spine, the noise of a foot being raised. "Don't!" she screamed, her voice echoing in the air, filled with desperation and panic. "Don't touch him." But her plea only made them laugh louder. "Let's see if this mutt's got any guts," the one called Rex sneered, his voice dripping with sick amusement. "Or is it just a little obedient lapdog?" Emily felt Shadow tense even more, his growl growing fiercer, but he didn't move. She knew he was waiting for the right moment. "Please don't do this," Emily prayed silently, unsure who she was speaking to, Rex, Shadow, or herself. All she knew was that the fragile line between safety and danger was about to be crossed. And then, as Rex's boot came down with clear intent, Shadow finally reacted. but not with panic, not with fear, with the instinct of a warrior. The moment Rex raised his leg to kick, the whole world seemed to slow down. Emily felt every heartbeat pounding in her chest, each breath growing heavier, as if the air around her had been sucked dry. She couldn't see, but every sound, every vibration in the air seemed sharper than ever. But before Rex's kick could land, Shadow sprang into action. The dog leapt off the ground with astonishing speed, so fast that Emily only felt the leash suddenly tighten before hearing a sharp, resounding bark slicing through the park's quiet like a knife. That sound wasn't like any bark Emily had ever heard before. It wasn't the sound of a gentle guide dog, but the powerful roar of a protector who had faced real danger. Shadow didn't bite. He didn't attack blindly. Instead, he moved with incredible precision, dodging Rex's kick by mere inches and settling into a defensive stance in front of Emily. His whole body tensed, fangs bared, eyes sharp as blades, locked onto the threat before him. Rex staggered back, clearly shocked by Shadow's fierce and professional reaction. "What the hell is this?" he stammered, his voice losing its usual confidence for the first time. Mick and Jared, who were always snickering in the background, had also fallen silent. Emily could hear murmurs from the people around them as a crowd began to gather. Someone whispered, "That dog, it's not like other dogs." Emily still clutched the leash tightly, but she knew Shadow was doing exactly what he felt needed to be done. She could sense the strength and determination in his every move. He wasn't just protecting her like a guide dog. He was like a warrior. "Back off," Emily shouted, her voice trembling but firm. "I told you, leave us alone." But Rex, though frightened, wasn't ready to abandon his act in front of the crowd. He tried to regain his arrogance, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "Just a stupid dog," he growled, but his eyes no longer met Shadow's as they had before. "I'm not afraid of you." Then, as if to prove his words, Rex lifted his leg again, this time with visible anger, aiming directly at Shadow. But the dog didn't wait any longer. In that moment, the instincts of a dog trained in the most dangerous situations fully took over. Shadow lunged with unimaginable speed. He didn't bite or cause injury, but the forceful shove against Rex's leg sent him sprawling to the ground, his back hitting the park's concrete hard. Rex screamed in pain, and this time, there was no trace of confidence or arrogance in his voice. The entire park fell silent for a few seconds. Every eye was on Emily and Shadow. Emily felt her breath heavy in her chest, but at the same time, she realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. Shadow stood there, not just as a companion, but as a solid shield between her and the world. At that moment, a deep, warm voice rang out from the crowd. "That's not just an ordinary dog," the voice said, firm and knowing. "That's a military dog." Emily turned her head toward the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. "What did you say?" she whispered, barely believing her ears. An older man, wearing a faded old military jacket, slowly stepped closer. His face was lined with the wrinkles of time and memories that could never fade. He pointed at Shadow, his eyes lighting up with unmistakable recognition. "I know that stance anywhere," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and respect. "That dog was trained for the battlefield. He's not just guiding you. He's saved lives before." Emily felt the world spin around her. Shadow, the dog who had led her through streets, who had stayed by her side through lonely nights, carried a past she had never known. She knelt down, her hand trembling as she stroked Shadow's thick fur, feeling his strong, steady breathing. "Shadow," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Who are you?" The old man's words echoed in Emily's mind, like a whisper from a past she had never known. "That dog was once trained for the battlefield. It's not just guiding you, it has saved lives before." Emily felt a surge of emotion. She bent down, her hands trembling as they touched Shadow's thick, warm fur. He still stood there, body tense, his gaze fixed on Rex, who was scrambling to get up a few meters away. But in the way Shadow stood firm in front of her, Emily sensed something deeper. This wasn't the first time he had faced danger. Shadow had been in situations like this before, and perhaps in far worse ones. "Shadow," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "What have you been through?" Rex, now stripped of his arrogance, limped backward, rubbing his leg and glaring at Shadow. But his look wasn't mocking anymore. It was pure fear. "That damn dog," he muttered, but his voice was weak, almost drained of strength. Before Rex could say anything more, the old man stepped forward, his gaze as sharp as a blade. "You should thank your lucky stars this dog only warned you," he said, his voice stern and leaving no room for argument. "If it truly saw you as a threat, you wouldn't still be standing." Rex swallowed hard, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. But the crowd had grown larger, and a few people had started pulling out their phones to record the incident. No one spoke, but the tense atmosphere and judgmental stares were enough to make Rex realize he wouldn't get away easily. "Come on, I didn't do anything," he tried to salvage the situation, his voice tinged with both fear and anger. "I was just joking. Joking." Emily couldn't hold back the anger rising in her chest. She stood up, still gripping Shadow's leash tightly. "You think threatening a blind person and their guide dog is a joke?" Her voice, though shaky, rang out clearly in the silent space. Rex opened his mouth to say something, but at that moment, the sound of police sirens blared in the distance, growing louder. A patrol car pulled up next to the curb, and an officer stepped out with a brisk stride and sharp eyes. New character introduced. Officer Lena Morales, a young, determined police officer known for her zero-tolerance attitude toward troublemakers. "Why is there such a crowd here?" Lena called out, her eyes sweeping over the gathering before settling on Rex and Emily. When she noticed Shadow's tense posture, Lena immediately grasped what had happened. "You there!" She pointed directly at Rex, her voice icy. "What's going on here?" Rex gulped, clearly not wanting to drag out the situation any longer. "Nothing, officer. Just a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything." Before Lena could respond, the old man, the one who had recognized Shadow, stepped forward. "It's not a misunderstanding, officer. He threatened this young woman and tried to kick her guide dog." Lena frowned, her eyes turning cold. "What did you just say?" She marched straight toward Rex without hesitation. "Do you know that threatening or harming a guide dog is a serious offense?" I was just joking," Rex stammered, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "Joking?" Lena raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I don't find it funny at all." Without another word, Lena cuffed Rex in front of the crowd. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." As Rex was pushed into the patrol car, Emily breathed a sigh of relief, though the sense of safety hadn't fully returned. She turned back to Shadow, who was still standing protectively in front of her, his eyes never leaving anyone around. The old man approached, his gaze softening as he looked at Emily. "This dog?" he began, his voice gentler now. "Did you know he once served in the military?" Emily shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I know. I just know he means everything to me." The old man nodded, his eyes filled with respect as he looked at Shadow. "He's not just your companion. He's a hero." Emily felt a lump in her throat, and tears welled up in her eyes. She bent down, hugging Shadow, feeling the strong and steady beat of his heart. "You're my hero, Shadow," she whispered, her tears falling onto his thick fur. "And I'm going to learn everything about you, I promise." After Rex was taken away, the crowd gradually dispersed, but the echoes of the incident still lingered in the air. Emily remained seated on the old wooden chair, her trembling hand gently stroking Shadow's thick fur. The dog was more relaxed now, but his eyes remained alert, watching every movement around him as if he still couldn't fully believe that the danger had passed. The elderly man in the faded military coat was still standing there, his gaze never leaving Shadow. Finally, he stepped closer, his deep, warm voice breaking the silence. "Do you know what this dog used to be?" he asked, but his voice was filled with sympathy, not judgment. Emily lifted her head, her blind eyes turning toward the direction of his voice. She shook her head slightly, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. "I only know that he's my guide dog," she replied, her voice trembling. "He's been with me since I lost my sight, but I don't know much about his past." The man let out a soft sigh, then sat down beside Emily, keeping a close enough distance for her to hear clearly, but far enough not to make her uncomfortable. He placed his hand on his knee, his gaze still fixed on Shadow. "I served in the military," he began, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia and the weight of memories. "And I've seen many dogs like this one. His posture, the way he reacts to danger, it's unmistakable. This is a military canine. He has been in places we can't even imagine." Emily fell silent. His words felt like puzzle pieces falling into place in her mind. She had always known that Shadow was special, but she had never imagined that he might have experienced such things. Are you sure?" she whispered, a mix of confusion and emotion filling her voice. "Absolutely," he nodded. "Do you see the way he moves? That's not the natural instinct of an ordinary dog. He has been trained to handle the most dangerous situations." Emily remained quiet for a moment, letting his words sink into her very being. She lowered her head, her hand gently stroking Shadow's head, feeling the warmth and the hidden strength beneath his thick fur. "Shadow," she called his name softly, almost in a whisper. "What have you been through? I know you always protect me, but I never thought you had once protected others too." The man looked at Emily with eyes full of understanding. "He's not just your protector, young lady. He's a hero, but heroes carry wounds that we cannot see." Those words made Emily choke up. She had always thought of herself as the one who needed saving after the fire that took her sight and her family. But now, she realized that Shadow, too, carried invisible scars from his past. Perhaps they had found each other not just because she needed him, but because he needed her too. "Do you know how I can learn more about his past?" Emily asked, a newfound determination rising in her voice. The man nodded. "You should contact the local veterans organization or military K-9 training centers. They might be able to help you find some information." Emily nodded in gratitude, feeling as if her world had just opened to a new horizon. After the man left, she remained seated with Shadow, feeling each of his steady breaths beside her. That night, back in her small apartment, Emily couldn't sleep. The man's words echoed in her mind like a song that wouldn't stop playing. He's a hero, but heroes carry wounds that we cannot see. She opened her laptop, her fingers carefully navigating the keyboard. One by one, she typed in search queries. Military K-9 dogs, retirement process for military dogs, veterans and service dogs. Pages of information appeared, and the more she read, the heavier her heart felt. Dogs like Shadow had endured not just rigorous training, but also the memories of war. Memories that even humans struggled to forget. She paused when she came across an article about military K-9s being placed in reintegration programs after retirement, many of them becoming guide dogs or therapy dogs. Shadow, or perhaps a different name he once had come to her not just as a companion, but as a soul searching for peace after life's storms. Emily turned off her laptop and looked down at Shadow, who was resting peacefully at her feet. She leaned down and placed her hand on his head. "Tomorrow we'll start finding out everything," she whispered. "I want to know who you are. I want to know your story, so you don't have to carry those memories alone anymore." Shadow stirred slightly, as if he understood the heartfelt promise in Emily's words. In that quiet moment, Emily knew that their journey was just beginning. A journey not only for her to understand Shadow, but for them to heal together from the wounds of the past. The next morning, gentle sunlight streamed through the window, weaving its way into the small room and casting everything in a warm, golden glow. Emily sat on the wooden chair near the window, her laptop open in front of her, but her mind was still tangled with everything that had happened the day before. Shadow lay quietly at her feet, his head resting on her leg like a silent reminder that he was always there, protecting her from life's storms. Emily had spent the entire night thinking about what the elderly man had said. He's a hero, but heroes also carry wounds we can't see. She had never imagined that she was sharing her life with a dog who had been through war, who had saved lives in the harshest of circumstances. She wondered what he had seen, who he had lost, and how a dog with such a past had become her companion on this journey. Determined not to let this uncertainty linger, Emily picked up the phone and called the local veterans organization the man had mentioned the day before. After a few rings, a warm female voice answered on the other end. "Hello, this is Liberty Veterans Organization, Karen speaking. How can I help you?" Emily took a deep breath before replying. "Hi, my name is Emily Harper. I have a guide dog named Shadow, but recently I discovered that he might have been a military canine. I'd like to know if there's a way to find out more about his past." There was a brief pause on the other end before Karen gently responded. "We can help you look up information if Shadow has an identification chip or original documents. Can you provide his serial number?" Emily nodded, even though she knew Karen couldn't see her. "I have his information card from when I adopted him from the Guide Dog Center. I'll read the number to you." After Emily read the details, Karen promised to get back to her once they had results. Hanging up, Emily sat in silence, her hand gently stroking Shadow's head. "I'll find out who you are," she promised herself, "and I'll stay by your side, no matter how heavy your past is." 2 days later, while Emily was preparing dinner, the phone rang. She recognized Karen's number immediately and hurried to pick it up. "Hello, Ms. Harper." Karen's voice came through, this time with a hint of excitement. "I found information about your dog. Shadow was previously known as Bravo. He served in the military and was partnered with Sergeant Jake Carter. They went on several missions overseas before Bravo was retired and transitioned into being a guide dog." Emily held her breath as she listened to Karen's words. Bravo. The name echoed in her mind like a fragment of a memory that wasn't hers, but was deeply connected to her loyal companion. "Sergeant Carter is now living in Montana," Karen continued. "If you'd like, I can provide you with his contact information. He might be able to tell you more about Bravo." Emily thanked Karen and wrote down the number with a slightly trembling hand. After hanging up, she sat quietly, her eyes drifting toward Shadow, who lay peacefully nearby. "Bravo," she whispered, trying out his old name. Shadow lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching, but there was no distinct reaction. It seemed he had grown accustomed to the name Shadow, but that didn't ease the growing curiosity in Emily's heart. She knew she had to call Jake Carter. She needed to know the rest of the story. That night, after much hesitation, Emily finally pressed the call button. Her heart pounded in her chest as she listened to the ringing. After 2 rings, a deep male voice answered on the other end. "Hello." His voice was hoarse, carrying a weariness but also something Emily couldn't immediately define. Longing? Pain? Emily took a deep breath. "Hi, is this Sergeant Jake Carter?" She paused briefly, then continued. "I'm Emily Harper, and I think I have the dog who used to be your partner. His name is Bravo." There was a long silence on the other end, so long that Emily almost thought the call had been disconnected. But then, she heard a heavy breath, as if the man on the other side was trying to hold back a surge of emotion. "Bravo," Jake whispered, his voice breaking. "God, I didn't think I'd ever hear that name again." Emily could feel the pain in his voice, and her heart sank. He's my guide dog now," she said softly. "I didn't know about his past until someone recognized him as a canine. I just want to understand him better." A small, bitter laugh came from Jake's end. "You have no idea how many times Bravo saved me," he said, his voice gradually warming. "He wasn't just my partner. He was family." Emily bit her lip, emotion swelling in her chest. "I think he's family to me now, too." Jake was silent for a moment. Then he spoke with firm resolve. "I need to see him. I need to see Bravo again." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And I think he needs to see you too." 3 days after the emotional phone call with Sergeant Jake Carter, Emily stood in front of her small apartment door, her heart filled with excitement and anxiety. She felt the invisible bond between herself and Shadow, or Bravo, as he was once called, shifting. She didn't know what would happen when he met the person who had shared life and death moments with him. Would he recognize Jake? Would this reunion change the relationship between them? She bent down to gently stroke Shadow's head, feeling the calm in his every breath. Even though she couldn't see his eyes, she knew he sensed the unease within her. "Are you ready, Shadow?" she whispered, though deep down, she wondered if she herself was truly ready. "We're about to meet someone who was once a very important part of your life." Shadow didn't react much, only gently resting his head against her hand, as if to say that no matter what happened, he was still here with her. That afternoon, a blue pickup truck pulled up in front of Emily's house. She heard the engine shut off and the car door close. Her heart pounded as heavy footsteps approached. Then came a knock on the door. Emily took a deep breath and opened the door. Even though she couldn't see who was standing in front of her, she felt the strong presence of the man on the other side. "Hello, are you Jake Carter?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with emotion. "Yes," Jake replied, his voice hoarse, as if trying to stay composed. "And you must be Emily." Emily nodded and stepped back to open the door wider. "Please come in. Shadow is right here." Jake stepped inside, but the moment he entered the room, the air felt heavy. Emily sensed the tension from both sides. Shadow stood up the moment the door opened, his body tense, but not from fear. He had sensed something familiar, something buried deep in his memory that he had tried to forget. Jake said nothing, simply kneeling down right in front of Shadow. He didn't rush to reach out or call his name. He just sat there waiting. Emily felt her own breath grow heavy, listening to every beat of silence in the room. Then, with incredible caution, Jake whispered, "Bravo, it's me, Jake." In that moment, Emily felt the leash in her hand tremble slightly as Shadow took a step forward. He lowered his head, sniffing the air around Jake, as if to confirm. And then, he let out a soft whine, a sound Emily had never heard before, not of caution, but of recognition and emotion. Shadow moved closer, resting his head in Jake's lap, and in that moment, all distance, all forgotten memories seemed to dissolve. Jake wrapped his arms around him, his voice choked with emotion. "I thought I'd never see you again, old friend." Emily stood there, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Her heart swelled with mixed emotions. Joy that Shadow had reconnected with an important part of his past, but also worry about whether this would change the bond between her and him. After a long while, Jake looked up, his eyes red but shining with gratitude. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Thank you for taking care of Bravo, for loving him." Emily swallowed her tears, trying to keep her voice steady. "He saved me more times than I can count," she whispered. "He's not just my guide, he's my family." Jake nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "And now he's our family." That evening, after Jake had left, Emily sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, with Shadow lying beside her. She gently stroked his soft fur, her mind full of thoughts. "Bravo," she whispered, testing his old name, but then smiled and corrected herself. "Shadow, no matter who you were, no matter what you've been through, you're still my Shadow now. And I'll always be here for you, just like you've always been here for me." Shadow lifted his head, gave her hand a gentle lick, then rested his head on her leg. Without words, Emily knew he felt it too. He had reclaimed a piece of his memory, but where he belonged now was with her. In that peaceful moment, Emily realized something important. Shadow's past didn't change their relationship. Instead, it only deepened their bond. She wasn't just someone he protected. She was the one who gave him peace amidst the memories of a turbulent past. And no matter what lay ahead, they would move forward together, not just as a woman and her guide dog, but as two souls who had found each other amidst the wreckage of life. The days following the reunion with Sergeant Jake Carter passed in peaceful silence, but within Emily, an undercurrent of emotion stirred. She noticed something different about Shadow, or Bravo, as she still secretly called him in her mind. He still guided her with his usual caution and patience, but sometimes, when they strolled through the park together, or when Emily sat quietly on the old wooden bench, she could sense his gaze drifting off to some distant place. It wasn't detachment, but a sense of longing. A part of him seemed to still belong to the memories of the battlefield, where he had once been a warrior, a protector not just for one person, but for his entire team. Emily understood that no matter how much she loved and cared for him, deep down, he needed something more, a purpose. One afternoon, as Emily and Shadow were sitting on their usual bench in the park, Jake called. His voice was warm and gentle, but it couldn't hide the concern beneath. "Emily," Jake began, "I've been thinking a lot about Bravo, about how he's changed since being with you." Emily smiled, gently stroking Shadow's head when she heard that name. "He's the light in my darkness," she said softly. But I also realize maybe I haven't given him enough. Jake was silent for a moment before replying. I think he's happy with you, but bravo. He's a warrior. He needs to feel like he's contributing. There's a rehabilitation center for retired K9 dogs I recently heard about. They help dogs like Bravo find a balance between their new lives and their old skills. Emily thought for a while, feeling her heartbeat sink with Shadow's steady breathing. He had given her so much, she thought. Now it was time to give him something in return. Can you send me the information? She asked, her voice filled with determination. I want to try. I want him to have a chance to be himself. A week later, Emily and Shadow arrived at the rehabilitation center for retired K9 dogs. The center was located on the outskirts of town, with open fields and specially designed training areas for dogs who had served in the military. As Emily walked in, she could feel the excitement radiating from Shadow through the leash. He gently pulled her forward, not with urgency, but with a kind of thrill she had never seen in him before. A woman named Laura, the head trainer at the center, greeted them with a warm smile. Hello, Emily. And this must be Shadow or Bravo, she said, kneeling down to greet him. We've been eager to meet him. Emily smiled, though her heart was still filled with worry. I just want to know if he'll find joy here, she said, her voice softening. I don't want him to feel like he's being left behind. Laura looked at Emily with understanding eyes. You don't have to worry. Dogs like Bravo never forget the ones who gave them love and safety. But sometimes they need the chance to remember who they once were and feel like they can still make a difference. Emily nodded, then loosened the leash as Laura led Shadow to the training area. She stayed behind, her heart pounding as she watched him go. Shadow began with a simple test, searching for and detecting a hidden scent among a series of boxes arranged across the training ground. Emily stood still, listening to every small sound, the tapping of Shadow's claws on the cement, his steady breathing as he focused on the task. Within minutes, Shadow found the box with the special scent, and Emily heard Laura clapping in praise. But what moved Emily wasn't Shadow's success. It was the soft bark he let out afterward, a sound she had never heard from him before. It was the sound of joy, of pride. Next came the obstacle course. Emily listened to him jump over barriers, run through tunnels, and climb steps she never imagined a guide dog like Shadow could manage. But this wasn't just Shadow. This was Bravo, the brave warrior, reconnecting with a part of his past he thought he had lost. When the training session ended, Shadow ran back to Emily, his eyes shining and his body trembling with excitement. He couldn't speak, but Emily understood every emotion he conveyed through the gentle licks on her hand and the way he rested his head in her lap, as if to say he had found an important part of himself again. Laura approached, smiling at Emily. Shadow, or Bravo, is truly amazing, she said, her voice filled with admiration. He's not only recalling his old skills, but also showing incredible spirit. You've taken great care of him. Emily felt her eyes sting with tears. I just did what I could, she whispered, stroking Shadow's head. But I think he saved me more than I could ever save him. Laura placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, her gaze gentle. And now, you're helping him find himself again. That's the greatest thing you could do. On the way home, Emily sat quietly beside Shadow, her hand resting on his back, feeling his steady, calm breaths. She knew their journey wasn't over. Shadow wasn't just her guide, and she wasn't just someone in need of protection. They were companions, navigating through the darkness together in search of the light. You know, Shadow, she whispered as they stopped at their doorstep. Whether you're Bravo, the brave warrior on the battlefield, or Shadow, my guide in the dark, you'll always be a hero in my heart. Shadow responded by gently resting his head against her leg, as if he understood every word she said. And in that moment, Emily realized they had found something more precious than the past or the present. They had found each other. After the first training session at the center, Emily and Shadow, or Bravo, as his old name had now become a familiar echo in her mind, began to find a new rhythm in life. Each week, they spent a few sessions at the center, where Shadow honed his old skills, satisfying instincts and intellect that had been sharpened over the years. But when they returned home, he became Emily's Shadow again, the loyal companion who guided her through familiar streets, always by her side in her loneliest moments. Emily noticed that after each training session, Shadow seemed more alive. He wasn't just performing the guiding tasks as before. He radiated confidence, as if he had rediscovered a part of himself that had long been lost. Yet, every evening when they sat together in their small room, Emily felt that the bond between them remained unchanged. Perhaps because she knew, no matter how glorious Shadow's past was, his present was always tied to her. One evening, as Emily and Shadow returned from the center, she received a call from Jake. His voice was warm, but carried a gentle undertone of regret. "Emily," Jake began after a brief silence, "I can't stop thinking about Bravo, about how he's changed. I know he's finding joy at the center, but I can't help wondering if he misses the days on the battlefield." Emily was silent for a moment, her heart heavy. She understood Jake's feelings, someone who had stood beside Bravo in life and death moments. But she also knew that Shadow was not just a warrior of the past. He was her companion in the present and future. "I think he remembers," Emily admitted, her voice soft but firm. "But I also believe he doesn't live in the past. He finds joy in those memories, but his present is here with me. And I'll do everything to make sure he feels happy." Jake was silent for a moment. Then he softly said, "I know you're the best person for Bravo." "Thank you, Emily." Emily smiled, warmth spreading through her heart. "He's my family, Jake, and I think he's always been your family too." As time passed, Emily and Shadow continued to explore the world together, each step carrying stories of their own. But one day, while they were strolling through Liberty Park, where it had all begun, Emily sensed a change in the air. Shadow stopped, his body tense, as if he had sensed a threat. Emily felt the tension in the leash and a creeping fear in her chest. She lifted her head, her ears attuned to every sound around her. And then she heard that familiar voice, the voice she had hoped never to hear again. "Well, look who it is." Rex's voice rang out, dripping with sarcasm. The blind princess and her dog. Emily froze. Though weeks had passed since their last encounter, the fear from that day was still etched deeply in her mind. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had Shadow, and he was more than just a guide. He was a warrior, her protector. Shadow stepped forward, his body rigid, his gaze piercing as it locked onto Rex. There was no need for growling or loud barking. His mere presence was enough to make Rex take a step back. Rex let out a bitter laugh, but his voice lacked confidence. "I don't want any trouble," he muttered before turning and quickly walking away. Emily stood still for a moment, feeling her heartbeat gradually steady. She knelt down, her hand gently stroking Shadow's head, feeling the firmness and strength radiating from him. "You're my hero, Shadow," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Shadow responded by resting his head against her leg, his eyes softening, as if to say he would always be there, protecting her, no matter what. That evening, when they returned home, Emily sat on the floor, her back against the wall, and Shadow lay beside her. She felt the peace spreading through every breath, every moment they shared together. "You know, Shadow," she whispered, her hand running through his soft fur. "We've both been through tough times. You have your war memories, and I have my own darkness. But we found each other, and that makes everything easier." Shadow lifted his head, his eyes gleaming with an unspoken understanding. He rested his head on her shoulder, and Emily felt her heart grow lighter than ever before. In that moment, she realized they were not just a person and a dog, not just a guide and the guided. They were two souls who had found each other amidst loss and pain, and together, they would walk the path ahead, no matter what challenges awaited. Because love and loyalty not only heal wounds, but also create miracles in life. Autumn arrived, and golden leaves covered the pathways in Liberty Park. Emily and Shadow walked slowly along their familiar trail, the rustling of dry leaves underfoot a reminder of time slipping by. Since the day they reunited with Jake and uncovered Shadow's, Bravo's, past, their lives had changed in ways Emily never imagined. Shadow was no longer just Emily's guide, but a reborn warrior, finding joy in training sessions at the K9 Rehabilitation Center. He didn't just help her overcome daily challenges. He stood as a living testament to courage and perseverance. But this was precisely what weighed on Emily's mind. One afternoon, as they returned from the center, Emily received a call from Jake. "Emily." Jake's voice echoed through the phone, deep and contemplative. "I've been thinking a lot, and I want to propose something." Emily listened, her heart slowing its pace. "There's a special program for retired K9 dogs," Jake continued. "They retrain these dogs to participate in search and rescue missions, or to provide therapy for veterans with PTSD. Bravo could do incredible things there. He could help so many more people." Emily was silent. She felt the weight of his suggestion. She knew Jake only wanted what was best for Shadow, and deep down, she wanted that too. But the thought of letting Shadow go left her feeling empty. He wasn't just a dog. He was her family. "Do you think he'd want that?" Emily asked softly, her voice trembling. Jake sighed on the other end. "I don't know, but I think he'd do anything to help others. And I know you'd understand that." That night, Emily sat on the floor, her back against the wall, with Shadow lying quietly beside her. She stroked his soft fur, feeling his steady, warm breath. She stared into the distance, contemplating the decision she was about to make. "He brought me light when I was lost in the dark," she thought. "Now, can I do the right thing and let him continue his mission? But does love mean letting go? Or is love also about holding on to what's most precious?" Emily leaned down, whispering into Shadow's ear. "What do you want, Shadow? Do you want to continue your journey? Or do you want to stay with me?" Shadow gazed at her with warm, knowing brown eyes, full of understanding but offering no clear answer. Open-ending, and here's where the story poses a question to you, the one listening. If you were Emily, what would you choose? Would you let Shadow, your loyal companion and brave protector, continue his journey to help others, knowing he could make a tremendous difference? Or would you keep him by your side, where he has become an irreplaceable part of your life? Emily and Shadow's story is not just about a woman and her dog. It's a story of love, sacrifice, and the difficult choices we face in life. Today, service dogs do more than assist the visually impaired. They play vital roles in supporting veterans, people with disabilities, and those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. They are not just animals. They are family, irreplaceable companions. But just like people, these dogs also deserve respect and the chance to find meaning in their lives. Emily's story makes us reflect on how to balance keeping loved ones close and letting them pursue a greater purpose in life. Sometimes love isn't about holding on tight. It's about giving them the freedom to grow and live to their fullest potential. So, if you were in Emily's shoes, what would you do? Would you keep your best friend by your side or let them continue their journey to help others? Think about it and share your thoughts, because sometimes the answer doesn't just come from the heart, but from a deep understanding of what's truly best for the one you love.